Hello everyone, this is BronyCalc, and welcome to the penultimate Parity Quest video. Today's question is I'm not going to write them all out. Even, odd, Steve, pseudo-Steve. Let's figure it out together, shall we? So, we've established before that infinite series tend to do some wonky stuff when you're working with evens and odds and the like. But what happens when you're working with Steves? For example, E's most famous form, the one some of you may know, is 1 plus 1/2 plus 1/6 plus 1/24 plus 1 over 120, and so on and so forth. Now, you might immediately look at this and say, didn't we just talk about last time how if you keep going down to infinite order Steves, that's be a pseudo-Steve? Well, that's technically true. There is one problem with that. We can group these together. When we did 1 last time, 1/2 plus 1/4 plus 1/8 and all that, each Steve was a different order. There was no grouping, and so it just had to cascade downwards into infinity. But here, these are first order Steves, these are third order Steves. Next up is going to be fourth order Steves, and it's just going to keep on going. So, what happens when we group these? Because we know that if we sum two of the same order, we're going to get maybe an even, maybe an odd, maybe something of a smaller order. So, but we'll never get something of bigger or equal order, is the point I'm trying to make here. So, if we start summing these, we get 1 plus 1/3 plus 1 over 20. And you can keep going like this. If you want to, that's perfectly fine. That's your prerogative. But maybe we can make the grouping a little faster by considering what we're actually doing here. Each grouping is 1 over 2n factorial plus 1 over 2n plus 1 factorial. And since this is just an odd times this, they're of the same order, Steve. So, when we add these together, you get 2n plus 2 over 2n plus 1 factorial. So, we just have to figure out if this order goes to infinity or not. And to be honest, it shouldn't be too hard for you guys to look at this and say, well, if n is an even number, like 2k for example, then this becomes 4k plus 1. This becomes 4k plus 2. This is only divisible by 2. It's not divisible by 4, and it's only going to cut it down by 1. So, as we go further and further down, and this keeps increasing in order, this will always have the same order, and therefore, we're going to end up with infinite order Steve. So E is a pseudo-Steve. Well, that was a rather short conclusion. Rather anticlimactic. But perhaps there's another way we can go about looking at this. Because certainly when you do that, it's fine, but what about all the other terms that were just sitting there? Well, we can look at E another way. This is another one you might know. Limit as n goes to infinity. Basically, n just keeps getting bigger and bigger. 1 plus 1 over n to the n. Well, if we look at this, to be honest, this is going to go in two different directions, and so that's not really too helpful to us. On the one side, if n is odd, then this is going to be an even number to the power of an odd, and that's going to go to an even. If n is even, though, then this is going to be a Steve, and this is just going to escalate the order over and over and over, and we are going to get a pseudo-Steve. However, we have no way of determining which one of these it's going to be. Now we could just err in the side of, well, we have pseudo-Steve here, and we have pseudo-Steve here, so that seems to make sense. And we could try combining these things in all kinds of different ways. But to be honest, I don't think any of that really gives the full answer. It's sort of the idea of that one thing you might have seen if you've been on the middle school forum, where it's 1 minus 1 plus 1 minus 1 plus 1 minus 1 equals 1/2. So, some people get really mad at this. They just take one look and say that doesn't make any sense. Some people, they take a deeper look, they understand that it involves the bending of the rules a little. And to be honest, most of the time, it does not matter or which one it actually is. So, we can kind of just leave it. There's no need to mess with it. If you want, you can say E is even and go about your day. Probably makes more sense to say E is a pseudo-Steve, but whatever works for you. To be honest, in a week, it is not going to matter. And if you're confused by that statement, then I guess you'll just have to wait until I see you next time. Like, comment, subscribe, and return for the final segment of Parity Quest.